Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Tiffany Trump of the UFC slump, Jack Slack. Because I peaced out. I hid all week and nobody noticed that I wasn't here. This last weekend there wasn't a UFC event, but there also wasn't anything on. So not really anything to catch up on. This weekend we got a UFC card which I think I'm going to enjoy, but it is one of those ones where there isn't a lot to talk about before the fights. And certainly I don't think anyone will be talking about it much before the fights. And I think unless something really weird happens, in 24 hours after the fights, no one's going to be talking about them either. So it's going to be one of those ones. Honestly, it could be one of those ones where something insane does happen, and still people forget that event. And in 10 years, you'll be on Reddit and it'll say, 10 years ago today, Alex Caceres tripped and his whole ass fell out on live TV. And people will go, oh my God, I just remembered that happened. What a weird event. So what we're doing today instead is that I'm hosting the Luke Thomas chat wrap on the Jack Slack channel. And we're going to be answering some questions from the prosecution. And I'm just waiting for them to pour in now. I've got threads up on Twitter, Facebook, and my YouTube channel. And I've got to say, the most common question across all three is some variation of why did the UFC fall off, or is there an end in sight to this UFC slump? Why is this UFC slump happening? I'll lead with that up front because then I can make it the thumbnail or the title and people can come in and get mad at me before they've listened. But this slump, I'm probably not the best person to talk to about this or to talk about this to you, because I've been quite jaded on the UFC's matchmaking and certainly on these fight nights for quite a while. I think I started the podcast back in 2016 and I was pretty skeptical about some of the events being put together then. And before that I was working at Fightland. And, even though the UFC provided half the money to set up Fightland and then promptly pieced out, I was often biting the hand that had originally fed them before I got there, and slagging off UFC events both ahead of time and afterwards. I've always been fairly skeptical. I think mainly I demand more because I know what the UFC has, and the UFC has a monopoly position or a monopsony position. They've got most of the best fighters in the world under their wing. Recent financial breakdown by John Nash, who does a lot of great stuff. John Nash and Paul Gift do all the good stuff on the UFC's financials, just rooting through what they do release, very slowly trickling out when they're made to by courts. Or in their own fucking investor material. Because this is the thing, the UFC doesn't release any of its documents because they're quite ashamed of it. But Endeavour are like, look how little we have to pay fighters and how much money we make. And they put that in their fucking investor brochures. But it came out earlier this week that the revenue split is now sitting around 13%, which you'd think would shut up all those people who were like, we haven't seen the revenue split in years. Just because it was under 20% 10 years ago doesn't mean that it's not risen now. And those people are probably back to sucking dick in a different way for the UFC, and saying 13% of a huge amount of money is still quite a lot of money. But it also came out that the UFC basically made more money than all other fight promoters in boxing, kickboxing, MMA combined. So they definitely have the cash to not only pay fighters better, but also just do better. Now, I want to tinge this with some understanding and some a little bit of being reasonable. There are 600 fighters on the roster. I don't expect the UFC to be able to effectively promote 600 fighters. But there are very few on some of these cards that you actually can get hyped for. It shouldn't be hard to find a couple of fights that actually get people going and put them on cards full of other people who don't really matter or who aren't really known yet. And I think it's all kicked off really when the UFC got its TV deal with ESPN, I suppose, is it a TV deal? Most people watch it through their apps. But yeah, their deal with ESPN is very similar to what WWE got when WWE's programming was just at its absolute worst. It was because they had a set TV deal. They get the set number of viewers every week. They get the same money, regardless of whether they draw or don't. It's an awesome thing to have. You put your business in great position. You're protected for X number of years. The only downside, of course, is that with that set amount of money, you have to find other ways to make money. If you want to keep selling unlimited growth. and the UFC does that by just plastering fucking adverts on everything. You can now buy your name on the octagon floor. Want mine just next to the prime hydration zone, the red prime hydration zone. So people did predict that the UFC would get lazy once they got that ESPN deal, once they announced it. But if you go back a few years, I can't remember when the Apex came in, but long before that, I was saying the UFC should get their own venue in Vegas because they could be an attraction just, like Siegfried and Roy or Adele when she had a... Did Adele actually do a residency? I know Britney did, but, any of those acts that people go to see in Vegas, if you put on fights every weekend at your Vegas venue, people are going to turn up. People go on stag do's, people in Vegas to gamble for the weekend. So I always thought that it would be a good idea to do a fight card in Vegas every weekend from their own venue, put it on Fight Pass or whatever, and maybe only do 4 or 6 fights so that you can have pretty strong headliners. You could do your Donald Cerrone's, your Jim Millers and things like that. And I think I sort of got that in a really monkey's paw sort of way because the UFC got the Apex, which is an arena with 200 people in, so they're not actually benefiting from a live gate in Vegas. And I know a lot of people are bummed out by the fact that there's no crowd, which really kills the hype on live sporting events. And they're still putting on, 15 fight cards. And there's cards where 26 of the 30 fighters came in through the Contender Series in their last 1 or 2 fights. But it's kind of a double-edged sword because the UFC, one of the big defenses of how weak some of these cards are, certainly in terms of things you can sink your teeth into and get excited about, known commodities, is that they got 700 fighters on the roster, 600 fighters. It's going to keep going up every time I say it. It's like when Helio Gracie fought Kimura. Kimura keeps getting bigger, Helio Gracie keeps getting smaller every retelling. But they've got 500, 600 fighters on the roster. They have to offer them 3 fights a year or whatever it is, contractually. And that means that they have to put on all these fights. But they keep bringing in new fighters cheaper and cheaper, which is not what you'd do if you were trying to find elite talent. That's what you're doing if you're trying to just fill out cards. So I think that the massive number of guys just coming from the regional scene to the UFC, being put in fights that don't really matter on these cards, is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it's something that they inflict upon themselves. But then that's the thing, you can't do a 6-fight card when the point of TV is to sell advertising space. You could do a 6-fight card with 2 hours of throwing it back to Karen Bryant and Anthony Smith on the desk in between, but that sounds fucking awful. That's what we get when there's a lot of knockouts very quickly. That is really a double-edged sword. Whenever there's a good fight, whenever there's a good night of fights and guys are getting exciting finishes early on, you've got more time staring at the fucking analyst desk, padding out the time that we've got scheduled in. But yeah, the slump isn't about finding talent. The talent, there are always going to be people who are fairly talented, willing to fight for the UFC for 10 and 10. Even though smart coaches with very good fighters are now taking them to your Bellators, your Ones, your PFLs. But their problem is more to do with the fact that they don't have enough known names to put on these cards to make people care. And I think that comes down to their problem as a promoter, which is that they don't really promote people very effectively at all. For all the people complaining that Bellator has events that you don't even hear about, I'm the most prominent voice slagging off Bellator every week, and people will say, I didn't even know there was a Bellator on until I heard you slagging it off. But the UFC, because it's hit this, every week there's a UFC, every month there's a pay-per-view, you're not looking forward to the pay-per-views because they're only slightly better than the fight nights now in terms of star value and exciting matchups. And they range wildly. I remember when every pay-per-view was there's a lot coming up. Because, this is back in UFC 40, 60, 70 times when we had a couple of fight nights and a UFC every, 6 weeks or something. But then 2 years ago, people started saying, well, of course this pay-per-view is pretty weak because that's the way the UFC does them. There's a strong one and then there's a weak one. And those people have rapidly retreated to trying to claim that there were never any good UFC pay-per-views and they've always been like this. Look at that UFC 289 card. Fucking hell. I hope they're paying Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush like double what they normally earn. But then, of course, that would undermine the entire point of the enterprise. And then what I presume is the real Mick Maynard was on Twitter this week being like, I bet Bloody Elbow still moans about the card we're not doing this week. And people pointed out rightly that you were doing a Road to UFC event this week, or 2 of them. Did you forget that? But and he's saying, like, tell me the last card that was bad. They've all been bangers. These athletes always bring it. And it was like, Rosenstruck versus Almeida fucking sucked, the card. Sucked beforehand because there weren't any stars on it, and sucked in the actuality because it wasn't very good. But there were like 3 knockouts within the first round on that card, and Jailton Almeida easily took down some dude and strangled him. So people were like, oh, it delivered. So what I'm saying is the slump results from the success of the UFC. They're suffering from success. And it will take a great jolt, was that Thomas Aquinas? I can't remember who said that. But a great jolt to shake them from this lethargic position. On the other hand, or not on the other hand, but on the positive note, one seemed to be breaking through popularity-wise. I've never heard so many people talking about one championship as I have in the last 6 months. They are hemorrhaging money, but they've got the Amazon deal. And of course, if Amazon wants you and you're a part of their programming, then you never really have to, well, provided all those Singaporean fail sons don't demand their capital back or any loans get called in, they can continue on like they are. And they put on amazing events with great fights. And one of the things that they've done, because they do a similar number of events to the UFC now. They have far less fighters. I mean, they're pitching themselves as an MMA organization, but what they do is they genuinely do a mix of martial arts rather than just mixed martial arts. And the UFC could absolutely do that. If UFC wanted to cut the legs out from one with 4-ounce Muay Thai, they absolutely could. Or grappling, they absolutely could. They wanted to start doing 4-ounce boxing in the cage, they could. It's the insistence on purity that's stopping them. And then you've got Bellator, who are about to be sold, apparently, but they need to be sold for this sport to get better, to be honest, because they are everything about that organization except the fighters that they've found and kept is garbage. They've managed to find some really good talent, either grown through their own organization or that they found very early and grew through their organization, or brought in from other organizations. And they do genuinely have about, I'd say probably about 5 to 10% of the best fighters in the world are in Bellator. Problem is, everything else about the organization fucking sucks. No one watches it. No one knows how to watch it. Last week or 2 weeks ago, they announced that their free events in Canada were now going to be pay-per-view, but you pay for 7 days access to the event. Why? Why do you need to do that? I mean, I just got Fight TV a few months back. You buy an event, it stays there. You can watch it whenever you want. Why are you doing this, Bellator? And only for Canada. It's just what I mean. Obviously, they're doing it because they're desperate for some kind of money-making method. But yes, the sooner they get bought out, the sooner we can have those quality fighters elsewhere. And PFL, I left till last because they're in quite an interesting position. Not only because all their fighters failed commission drug tests this week, including Rob Wilkinson, their light heavyweight champion, who I was really enjoying his little run outside the UFC. If you fail commission testing, you're a fucking idiot, because they tell you when they're going to do it. But the thing about PFL is that I've heard, and I haven't actually looked into this that much, but I've heard that because they're also on ESPN, I assumed that ESPN was going to try and make them into like a UFC minor league or something like that. But apparently there's some CAA involvement. If you didn't know, Endeavour were WME, William Morris Endeavour, and they were a talent agency. And the 2 big talent agencies were William Morris Endeavour and CAA. And CAA decided that they want to get into the fight game now as well. And the other interesting theory that I've heard is that ESPN might try and elevate PFL ahead of renegotiating the deal with the UFC at the end of this contract, which would be very interesting because while the UFC is an enormous property and worth a lot of money, it's only really worth that money to people who have that money and need things on their programming schedule. So the ESPN fit was perfect, but it's like, if ESPN don't want you for the money that you're going to take or demanding, who else will? So that's my thoughts on the slump. ultimately they could still book some better fucking fights in these main events. Just spread them out a little bit more. Even though we're saying that they are, there's too few good fights to get excited for generally. But yeah, these main events, like Mackenzie Dern main event, no. I do like that they're doing a flyweight main event this weekend, and Kai Kara France is one of my faves. But again, this is not going to get too many people super excited. But anyway, that's enough moaning about that. So many people ask that question, why are we in a slump, blah, blah, blah. We're in a slump because the UFC has over-succeeded. But, like I said, things outside the UFC are looking better than they have in a pretty long time, to be honest. And that's why I'm trying to make more effort to, well, that combined with the UFC's laziness is why I'm making more effort to cover other MMA organizations and other combat sports organizations on these podcasts and hype them up a bit. Samir asks, top 5 favorite fighters in combat sports right now. Damn, that's a good one. Me personally, who do I like? That's a good one. And I suppose because it's just favorites, I don't really have to justify. But some of them will be for excitement, some of them will be for technical stuff. But, I think top of the list for me, must-watch fighters, Charles Oliveira. Just never a dull moment. Brilliantly technical, finishes fights more often than he doesn't, and just brings incredible excitement. He's the perfect crossover point between technical and exciting. I think most people would agree. He's got an enormous fan following, Charles Oliveira, specifically because he is just so exciting. I'd say maybe Dustin Poirier. The fights he's in nowadays, they interest me less, but I suppose we don't really want him in title contention right now, given that he looked bad against Teep and then lost to Oliveira. But they'll probably try and shoehorn him into title contention if he beats Gaethje in the rematch they've just announced. That happened since the last time we spoke. Yeah, should be fun. More technical Gaethje against Dustin Poirier, I like the idea of, because that was the back-to-back fights, Gaethje versus Alvarez and Poirier. Both of them just ran him ragged, hit him with body shots, kept the work rate up. Both of them attempted takedowns just to make Gaethje work more. I think it was Poirier who took him down, and Gaethje immediately exploded up to his feet, and they broke away, and Poirier was like, okay, and you could see just Gaethje was breathing out his arse. But Dustin Poirier, for me, not only an exciting fighter with just bricks in his hands, but a weirdo technician, and I do love a weirdo technician, which is why Mansour Barnaoui, also one of my favourites, doesn't always win, lost to Brent Primus recently, but he always brings something bloody weird. And a lot of martial arts for me is what weird shit can I copy? As a hobbyist level striker and grappler, what can I steal and have fun with? To take it outside of MMA, have I already done 3? Shit. I'll go 2 MMA. So we'll go Charles Oliveira and Dustin Poirier in the funweight division. Chingiz Alazov, kickboxer, absolutely phenomenal. And again, this is sort of, damn, this is a list that's going to heavily bias exciting fighters, and I think some people will want me to pick elite technicians. I mean, obviously, if you get to this level, you're a pretty good technician, but Chingiz Alazov is spectacular for the reason that he fights in one of the deepest divisions in kickboxing. He's fought some of the absolute pound-for-pound best kickboxers in the world in this little run he's on. And he also, in a division where, quite famously, the top guys have been defensive savants. So you had Giorgio Petrosian for a very long time. You had Sitichai and Superbon, both very methodical, technical, sit back, do outwork the opponent, but really cut off what they can do. And those guys really did well in that division. And Alazov hasn't fought Petrosian, but he has fought Superbon and Sitichai back-to-back, and he looked great against both. I mean, he knocked out Superbon in his last fight. And it's that being able to work a frantically aggressive style against very accomplished defensive technicians and tacticians. It's kind of like how Gordon Ryan turned up on the grappling scene, and submissions were something that people really had to work for, and maybe a 50% submission rate was pretty decent at high-level competitions. ADCC, before Gordon turned up, the submission rates were going down. They were becoming sort of stalemate wrestling matches, and even passing guard was pretty rare. And then Gordon Ryan turns up and starts submitting everyone. That's what Chingiz Alazov is to kickboxing. He didn't finish Sitachai, but like he has the capacity to finish anyone. And I've written about him before. Go to the Patreon, look up Chingiz Alazov. I previewed his match with Superbon, but yeah, the style is just gorgeous. All high kicks, throwing blistering hand combinations and then ending them with high kicks, leaving with the high kick. I love that. If you remember Blood Diamond, who they were hyping forever, the city kickboxing guy, and all the CKB guys were like, he's going to be great when he gets to the UFC, and he just wasn't. But I can understand why they liked him so much, because in training he's probably given them a very difficult time, because in his most recent fight you saw him striking. It's like right hand lead hook, lean back, left high kick on the way out. And that shit trips up very good technicians even, because it's just weird. And Chingiz Alazov has a lot of that. Ending things with high kicks, switching stances, buzz sawing off both hands, using hooks to get the guy ducking into uppercuts, using uppercuts to get the guy standing up for hooks and high kicks. Who else? John Haggerty. I don't have much patriotism on my who gets to be my boy, but John Haggerty, I've been enjoying him for a long time. Actually, not a long time. I found out about him when he fought Sameh, because he only had like 15 fights at the time. But since he turned up in one, I've devoured every fight he's had. He's just so much fun. And it was a real treat to watch him knock out Nongo, because it happened in a way that I least expected. I thought if he's going to beat Nongo, he's going to do it with his teep and his switch kicks and his elbows. And he didn't. He banged him out with punches, which is like the first time he's ever done that. But terrific to see him getting like the respect that he probably deserves. Because with the Sameh win, it was all, Sameh was old. And with the Rodtang fights, it was like he had a really good back and forth first fight with him. And then the moment that he lost the second fight, it was like, first fight doesn't count. Clearly Rodtang wasn't in the right headspace. Those sort of people. So it was really nice to see him get his dues with the knockout over Nogo. Though there were people being like, well, when you've got 4-ounce gloves, that takes all the skill out of Muay Thai. It's really stupid opinion. And then I suppose Gordon Ryan. The question was combat sports. Yeah, so Gordon Ryan. If Gordon Ryan grapples someone good, I'm going to watch it. Gordon Ryan grapples someone bad, I'm probably going to watch it. That was a trend like 3 or 4 years ago for a couple of years. The trend was match up elite grapplers with known MMA fighters, and they get heel hooked to death. Except when Uriah Faber turned up against a 16-year-old Nicky Ryan and slapped the shit out of him with collar ties the entire match. It's like, Uriah, it's a child. Why are you beating the shit out of him? Hotcock, great name, asks left hook palm in or palm down, depending on distance or hard and fast rule, ? That's going to be personal. I mean, I feel more comfortable throwing long left hooks with the palm down. And short left hooks, actually. Yeah, no, I'm a palm down man. But I do sometimes throw palm in hooks. I don't feel comfortable throwing them long. I really like turning the hand over almost too much. Because if you turn your hand thumb down on a hook, which is really quite extreme, but if you turn your hand thumb down on a hook, you can go out as far as you want, almost straight arm even, and you're still hitting with the back of the fist, or at least the two knuckles. If you are punching with your hand, with your palm facing you, the moment that you get sort of past 90 degrees, you have a really elevated risk of hitting the guy with your, what I call the door-knocking knuckles. And that's where a lot of injuries happen. When people say they broke their hand, sometimes they just mean that they've mangled their fingers, and it hurts when they throw punches. Ryan says, funniest fight of the year so far. Oh, what was that one? Bohm versus Ji-Yun Kim. Actually, that was on the Rosenstruck Almeida card, so there was a saving grace on that card, but just so daft. This girl's beating the shit out of her on the feet and keeps taking her down and then fouling her there. And then we ended up with a technical split decision to round it all off. Absolutely brilliant. Taking Ji-Yun Kim's record in the UFC to 5 losses on the trot. That's an Angela Magana style record. Ben says, the lack of prevalence of judo in MMA, we've had a few who used it to great effect, e.g. Ronda, Kayla, Caro, Parisian, for people who don't know, Habib, etc., but it has never seemed to become mainstream. I think mainly because it is very removed from MMA. It's to come from wrestling to MMA, You still have to learn a load of shit, but you're going to be using a lot of the same mechanics that you had already. Judo to MMA, you're losing the gi, and the gi is a huge part of judo at the highest levels anyway. If you watch the Olympics or anything like that, half the battle is the grip fight, which doesn't exist in MMA. Now, granted, in wrestling, there's a load of stuff that doesn't exist in MMA. Guys getting down so that their heads are blocking each other from entering on the legs and so on. All of the hand fighting in wrestling doesn't exist in MMA. But the vast majority of throws in judo are performed using the gi. You see people using judo in wrestling. There was a great, I can't remember his name. There's a college wrestler, Steven something or other maybe. But you'll see clips of him just foot sweeping guys in NCAA tournaments, and it's really cool. Just getting an overhook and foot sweeping a guy or something like that. Or Satiev, the great Chechen wrestler, famous for a lot of things, but hit a lot of sort of uchimatas and judo techniques. But things that are done by like the overhook or the underhook in judo are very much the exception. And leg grabs don't exist in high-level judo anymore. So there's a lot. So while on the surface it looks like it would be an amazing skill to develop for MMA, and certainly judo throws and trips are a really important skill to develop for MMA, it's one of those things that you can go so far down the rabbit hole at like international level competition and it just won't carry over. It's kind of like being a gi jiu-jitsu world champion in the modern era. Not going to carry over very much at all to MMA. I mean, you'll have good top control and things like that, but the gi game is now so, I want to say up its own arse. No, the gi game is now so in-depth that like there's loads of stuff you're training that will never have any bearing on grappling someone who isn't wearing pajamas with handles on. So there's that, and there's also the fact that the International Judo Federation seems to hate MMA, and who is it, the IJF? Yeah, because like people are always going, Teddy Riner in MMA, that'd be great, and he's been brainwashed by them. He says things like MMA is a sport that lacks discipline or something like that. Just the Budo bullshit. They could have used Ronda Rousey's success to advertise judo to a whole generation of little girls, and they didn't seem to give a shit about Ronda Rousey. But judo, just competitively at high levels, is bizarre anyway, because all they seem to do is ban techniques to make it less interesting. I can understand banning things that are unsafe or whatever, but banning things like leg grabs, or fucking pickups. They banned, I think it was category when they banned as anything but a counter, and then they banned it outright. Who doesn't love watching a fucking kategoruma or a fireman's carry? That being said, judo, sambo, they're very, very similar. A lot of the guys who are having success out of Dagestan have sambo backgrounds. So there is, people are training it. I'm just saying that getting to the highest levels, very rare for it to carry over. I mean, a great example would be Satoshi Ishii. He wanted to be a great MMA fighter. He won the gold in the Beijing Olympics and literally got off the mat, gave an interview. They said, what do you want to do next? He said, I want to go to MMA and I want to fight Fedor. How crazy is that? Someone from another sport just doing that like at their peak moment in their own sport. Someone like an NCAA wrestler said, I want to go to MMA and fight so-and-so in their post-tournament interview on the mats. How crazy would that be? But yeah, he came to MMA. He was okay. He beat a lot of regional heavyweights, but certainly you did not see him applying his incredible throwing game. He basically became sort of like a double leg and submit people from the top kind of guy. Even Kayla, a lot of what she does is fence wrestling and double legging people, which is more to do with like being an athlete and learning, MMA and wall wrestling than it is to do with having that amazing judo background. Volk versus Conor, who wins? Says CG. And how? Now? Conor McGregor at 180 pounds or whatever. They've got the first episode of Tough Up, and he's so clearly not going to fight. Like, you just look at him going, yeah, no, you are not in shape to do this. You'd be absolutely deluding yourself if you took this fight. And I really hope he doesn't, because Michael Chandler's just a really annoying guy. It'd be hilarious if he did all this work to get the fight and then didn't get the multi-million-dollar fight. But Volkanovski, I don't want to overhype this, but I think Volkanovski is about as good as any fighter I've ever seen to this point. I think he's about as good an MMA fighter as there's ever been right now. That might sound, I don't know, exaggerated or whatever, but like I can't think of people who are as well-rounded, as much of a force in all areas, and who mix it all together so well. And I know this is the thing, like, when you say someone's well-rounded, that changes from generation to generation. Frank Shamrock could throw up an armbar off his back and take people down and throw some punches and a kick. And people were like, he's so well-rounded. But now, being well-rounded means, like, all these different positions, being able to box into your takedowns, being able to kick, being able to build off things like that. You know, it's... I'm sure it's going to change again, but right now, Volkanovski is as good as anyone's ever been. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that people were arguing about one round, the scoring of one round, when he went up 10 pounds to fight the champion in the division above, who is also just a wrecking machine. That being said, Conor McGregor is still a unique challenge for his opponents. The southpaw stance, I think, could be difficult because Volkanovski loves the low kicks so much and likes to counter off the low kicks, but does get hit when he goes for low kicks against taller opponents because he's dealing with that length differential. And the other thing is that, like, one of his main moves against southpaws is to step deep, shift through, and throw like a leaping southpaw right hook. So he really does commit, and you saw that against Max, and Max was able to, in the second fight, start timing him. But lunging headfirst in against Conor McGregor, that's the one thing that could set up Conor's counter left hand, which, you know, it's become a meme to be like, well, when he takes that left hand shot or whatever. But it was Conor McGregor's stock and trade, timing, getting guys coming in, fading away, and timing the left hand across the top. And the front kicks and things he added played into that and invited opponents in. I think people forget like how good Conor McGregor was because of how how he's sort of fucked his legacy because he got... Well, I mean, he's another one suffering from success. Earned his $500 million or whatever, went away, tried to come back. You know, if he'd been here the whole time fighting, yeah, he'd have more brain damage and a lot less money, but he'd be a better MMA fighter right now. Basti says, who uses the Teep well in MMA and what's to learn from them? I'm going to say front kicks interchangeably. You know, sometimes we talk about mechanics and we say front snap kicks, front push kicks, or Teeps. But the front kick generally, guys to watch, Israel Adesanya does a great one. He goes orthodox, throws a step up inside low kick or a step up high kick with his left leg, puts it down behind him in southpaw, and then he punts you with a front kick. You know, a left front kick from southpaw. So the back leg all the way through, and he really takes it out of people with that one. He does it in almost every fight. Another one would be Sean O'Malley. Switches stances constantly, but uses the front kick to wind people and to get them running at him. You know, just like Conor McGregor did. The front kick, if you're a gangly guy and you want to counterpunch, front kick the shit out of people, because if they pick it up, they're on the end of your leg. It's a nice one like that because he's going straight. It's not going... If you're throwing round kicks, the guy can step in on you and get inside of your knee and run through you or punch you. But if you're throwing front kicks, they're very sort of pokey. It goes straight out you pick your knee up and you throw it straight at the opponent, and there's not really the opportunity to step inside it and crowd you. Worst comes to worst, they pick up your foot, but then they're on the end of your leg and you double teep. If you watched, who was it? Might have been Same's last fight against Ryan something or other, but he got his kick caught and he teeped the guy about 3 times while standing on one leg to free his leg. But also getting kicks caught out of range like that, I really like it because you can throw elbows off it. And if you get your kick caught where your foot and knee are between you and the opponent, that's really good to start elbowing them with. And you can, you know, start fighting back into a 50-50 clinch and disengaging from there. It's if the opponent steps inside your knee and crowds you that it gets really bad, and that's round kicking, generally. That being said, you know, you can absolutely get crowded out of a front kick. You sort of have to misread it much worse than a round kick. Bigger margin for error. Trying to think of some other ones. Loads of people are using it nowadays. Donald Cerrone would have the odd fight where he'd just decide he liked front kicking again. The second fight against Jim Miller just killed him with front kicks. But I think it's one of those things where it typically, you don't need to see an awful lot of like setups for it. The Israel Adesanya one's good, where you kick or you punch and you step back into the opposite stance and then you front kick from that stance, because by stepping back a full step into the opposite stance, shifting back if you will, you've made a lot of space, so you've made space for the front kick. And they're also probably going to try and follow you, so you're walking them onto a long technique, which is quite hard to do. But typically, a lot of guys are doing well just throwing the front kick out for volume because it wins people throwing it to the body and it fatigues them and it makes them make stupid decisions by trying to grab it and run in on you and stuff. But it sets up counter-punching and counter-elbowing and things like that really well. In fighting game terms, it's a poke, so you should just be throwing it out whenever you want to and dealing with the consequences of the opponent trying to come back at you, rather than trying to look for the perfect time to land it as like a knockout blow. What's your favourite punch? Says an eye emoji. Cross counter. Right hand across the top of the opponent's jab. Do you think the UFC is on the decline in terms of talent and entertainment? Yep, hundreds of questions like that. Oh, Gerald says, 3 techniques you feel will become meta later on. Who's your highest hyped prospect and why isn't it Ilya Topuria? 3 techniques I think will become meta. Jesus. I think you're going to see, well, I hope you're going to see more people elbowing from the clinch, using it to break from the clinch, using it to enter the clinch. I feel like now that Leon Edwards is champion, people might actually start paying attention to that because he learned it about 6 fights ago, murdered everyone he's fought with it. His brother just knocked out Machida with it and then beat... I genuinely actually can't remember his name. I know it's a bit, but... Misasi, sorry. He beat Misasi recently. His brother's pretty mid, but he still uses the elbows really well. Just elbowing in and out of the clinch is something that everyone should be doing all the time. And of course, the dynamic and the positions are completely different to Muay Thai. You know, Muay Thai is where guys are elbowing all the time, but the clinch is set up to prevent the elbows, and also the clinch is set up for boxing gloves and not dealing with, you know, traditional pickups and takedowns and things. It's only the foot sweeps that they have to worry about and dumps. But if you're dealing with like a wrestling clinch where everything's underhooks and overhooks, body locks, you know, there's a lot of opportunities to unlock your hands and throw an elbow. Add knees to that, and that's 2 techniques done. And I think maybe the leg drag. If you look at what Craig Jones is doing with leg drag positions at the moment, I think it's his Power Ride DVD, but I mean, you can go and watch Craig Jones rolling at any of these seminars and things, or just with MMA fighters. He did one in Thailand recently, and there was loads of footage of him rolling with Jimmy Crute and various other Australian MMA fighters, and it's just crazy the level he's working on. But one of the things that he really has been preaching, and this is quite interesting because he's a guy who grapples under ADCC rules a lot of the time, but has been working with MMA fighters so much recently that, or in recent years, that his focus seems to have really changed. It's quite interesting because he trained Volk for the Makhachev fight, and then some of the cage wrestling stuff that came up in the Makhachev fight, if you go back and watch the B-team videos, there's one where Craig isn't there. He was not there for a period because he's training Volk in Australia. But in that video, Damian Anderson's talking about taking an MMA fight, and they're all talking about clinch fighting along the fence. And they start talking about a position that then they start asking, like, how would you attack this position? And the position is the one that Volkanovski uses to defend himself against Makhachev in a large portion of their fight. But yes, one of the things Craig Jones is on about at the moment is like side control. He doesn't see it as a quality pinning position because you don't have control of the guy. And if you watch MMA, you know, Kelvin Gastelum and people like that, they'll give you side control. They'll let you pass because if you're not sitting on their legs, they can turn to their belly and start building up. So what Craig Jones has been talking about is like walking back from passing the guard, walking back towards the guy's legs, crossing them over and kneeling on the bottom one. So, you know, leg drag position. If you watch Overeem versus Sakai, Overeem knocks him out from there, basically. He walks him into the leg drag and starts elbowing him. And Sakai, because it's heavyweights, they're big guys. So there's always sort of like the out that if you're in a leg drag, you turn your back and you try and get up. Kind of like the quarter mount with the Dagestani handcuff. It's one of those ones where you do have a way out. It's just not a very good one. But Sakai is 1, tired, and 2, Overeem's massive, so he can't even turn his back and start getting up. Overeem just elbows him into a TKO. And the leg drag's real easy to get to. You know, people know it as a pass because that's how it got famous with the Mendes brothers and people like that doing it. But it's really, as a position, you can walk there from side control. You just walk back towards the guy's hips and kneel on his bottom leg. Top prospect, who's that Japanese lad in the flyweight division? He's shit hot. I want to say Tyra. Michael says, I know you've been asked about this before, but I'd like to approach the issue from a slightly different angle. What are your thoughts on using height classes instead of weight classes? That way you're getting rid of weight cutting until a savvy coach invariably finds a way of shortening or rapidly lengthening their fighter at the expense of their health. Also, this incentivizes fighters to put on muscle, and we find out the point of negative effect that muscle mass starts. Yeah, it's quite a well-worded question, but this is normally from short boys who've been upset in sparring by long boys. The high class thing sort of falls apart because when you remember, I mean, I always just say Max Holloway and Mark Hunt are the same height. So that's that just blown out of the water, that idea. Or Max Holloway in DC. But it's quite interesting because I always thought point fighting is a sport that should be done by height on account of it being just tagged. You're not hitting people full force, so the weight shouldn't matter. And there's not really much wrestling. I mean, there's throws and takedowns, but it's not extended wrestling. But still, like Rafael Agaev, who's a very accomplished point fighter in karate, and recently beat up Raymond Daniels at the age of 40. In his first full contact fight, he fought Raymond Daniels and embarrassed him. It was hilarious. But Rafael Agaev always gave up like a foot of height to his opponents, but was the same weight class. And you look at that and going, damn, if they were height classes, he'd be even better, because he's bursting across this enormous distance to catch these skinny beanpole lads. But height classes, in a sport where you are actually hitting each other and wrestling, I think that's quite silly, because weight is the bigger factor in all of that. Height is one factor in fighting a long fight, which most people, one, can't do. Two, height is only one part of it. If your arms are really short too, if your arms are really short as well, you might not even be able to do that well. And three, I can't remember my third point, but rule of threes. Do my Daniel Cormier. Say everything 3 times. Say everything 3 times. Say everything 3 times. Someone asked about the Squid Triangle asks about my thoughts on the B Team versus New Wave saga and the bizarreness of the whole situation. Danaher Death Squad breaking up after, quote, apocalypse now in the jungle with Danaher as Colonel Kurtz. To quote Craig, I haven't heard that, but the Ryan brothers splitting apart but choosing to live on different sides of Austin and mutually accuse each other of steroids and shitpost back and forth. I'm a huge fan of both sides technically and watch a lot of instructionals from both of them, but think New Wave are coming across personality-wise like the villains in an 80s sport movie, especially with Merigali LARPing as Gordon in karate pajamas for some reason. That last Who's Number One was like bad pro wrestling. The whole thing is bizarre. I remember when they did break up. Sorry, if you don't know, the Danaher Death Squad is John Danaher's team in grappling. They revolutionized the leg lock game. Loads of good guys there. During the COVID stuff, they went to Puerto Rico where they could still train and not pay any tax. And then they decided to move to Texas. And then at some point they split and they are now both teams in Austin. So there was all this talk about like they will secretly be training together for ADCC and it's all just for show or whatever. But the more it goes on, the more it just seems like, this is the thing. What it seems like is that Gordon Ryan is such a unlikable personality that he's the greatest grappler who ever lived, probably. And people don't want to train with him. It's so weird. Because basically the B team, the vibe you get is that they're cool guys. Gordon Ryan's own brother has gone to the B team instead of hang out with John Danaher. And it's really interesting. Like Nicky Ryan, they put up a Q&A with Nicky Ryan after a class the other day, because I think he's acting as their head coach now. And he's never had the competition success that Gordon has because he was being touted as like the future of grappling from age 16. I think he went to ADCC at 16, I think it was, and he met Paul O'Meao, and ended up losing to Paul O'Meao by, I think, the points. But anyway, there was all this talk about like how he was going to be the future, and it just never turned out because he didn't compete that much. And then he'd start competing, like he had this match against Dante Leon a couple of years ago, looked incredible against a world-class black belt, and in the course of winning that match, he blew out his own knee, and then he was out for another year. So and then he came back for ADCC, and it seemed like he got the yips or something because he just couldn't get anything going until like the last minute of the match. But again, that's the thing. Like, if you only compete at the biggest event in the world and you never take like tune-ups or anything in between, you're going to get the jitters. But yeah, they put up this video of his Q&A, and he just seems like he's got incredible depth of knowledge on this stuff because he's been training with John Danaher since he was a child. But, training with John Danaher probably gets on your tits after a while. I think the really funny part is that the B Team YouTube channel has been doing amazingly. Like, Craig Jones has a lot of fingers in a lot of pies, and he's very good at monetizing things in a way that people don't feel is super cringe. If he says something funny, he'll put it on a t-shirt. If people say they like his shorts, he prints up like a load of different variations of them and sells them. He puts out great instructional content all the time. But their YouTube channel's been doing really well because the vibe they give off is just, well, firstly, they put in rounds in every episode, like rounds between two of the members of the B Team just going at it. And that's always great to watch. And then they just seem like chill guys in between. And then New Wave Jiu-Jitsu started their own YouTube channel. And it's just clear that like that place is a personality vacuum. They got like Giancarlo Bodini, who's a brilliant grappler, and Merigali and Gordon Ryan, who are all, again, brilliant grapplers, but like they're going, oh, we're going to try and close the Captains of Crush #3 Crusher or whatever it is. Like, zero fun in this episode. And then you go, yeah, well, I think I'll probably go back to watching the B Team now. I'll be honest, I'm probably never going to Austin because, why would I? But if I did, I'd go to the B Team. Even knowing that John Danaher is, Yoda, basically. Just seems like I, as a normal person, would have more fun at the B Team. Benjamin says, what makes a good pressure fighter, and who, in your opinion, is the best example of that? I think what makes a good pressure fighter is not even necessarily... This is the thing, like, pressure fighting is so cardio heavy that you can be a great pressure fighter and not actually be able to cut the ring or shit, something like that. If you're just walking after someone and they're running the entire time, it doesn't matter if you're not cutting the ring on them. You might not be able to hit them as cleanly. You might not get your attacks in well, but you're going to tire them out, and then they're going to slow down, and then you're going to be able to hit them. So really what makes a great pressure fighter is pace. You don't even have to have good defense. I would like a pressure fighter to have good defense or good head movement, because that's what's going to keep you safe with all these fights. It's the best way to get finishes at the elite level, but it's also going to be very hard on your body because you are putting yourself in harm's way all the time. When you're a pressure fighter, your presence is what you're using to get the guy moving, to cut the guy off. Guys who have hundreds of fights don't tend to be pressure fighters. He says, knowing that Rod Tang exists. Great examples. Oh, the best example of that. Well, in MMA, I don't know, maybe young Gaethje. Absolutely reckless, but did absolutely wear people down. Tony as well. Habib even. There's a lot of different things you can do as a pressure fighter. You could be a pressure fighter striking, you could be a pressure fighter wrestling, but it's just keeping that pace up and not letting the other guy do anything. If you want an example of a guy who's not a pressure fighter putting on a great pressure performance, Michael Johnson versus Edson Barboza. He was the one who, I think he was the first one who really exposed that hole in Edson Barboza. Backed him up, kept him running the entire fight. Edson Barboza was knackered. But best example of that style philosophy, probably Julio Cesar Chavez for me, because he constantly moved forward, but he didn't get hit that much. And he was constantly in his opponent's face and making them move, but he was still quite safe. He really walked that knife edge wonderfully. If you watch his fight with Camacho, I think I did an article on that a few years back at Fightland. Chavez versus Camacho. Camacho is very slick, very good outside mover, and there's some really high-level ring cutting going on in there. But the main thing is that Julio Cesar Chavez just never gives him a break. I also think you've got to have an ability to stop the guy tying you up, because in MMA, they tie you up and they start wrestling. In boxing or kickboxing, they tie you up and that's a break, and then they get some time off. To keep pressure effectively, you've got to be able to make the guy work. And if he can just fall on clinches, that's not making him work. That's him getting resets. Oh, and the second part of that question from Benjamin was, how do you discern whether a fighter has slowed down or is just facing an opponent who is better than expected / has prepared very well for their style? I had that with Max Holloway. I thought he looked absolutely terrible against Yair Rodriguez. And then, of course, he had the fight with Volkanovski and got beat up. But then he looked great against Arnold Allen, who's also a very good fighter. So I think he's probably lost a step, but I don't think he's washed. Just Yair Rodriguez is much better than I gave him credit for. And Volkanovski, like I said, is, in God mode right now. Kyle says, X-Guard for MMA, question mark? Charles Oliveira. If you watch Charles Oliveira versus Hioki, does a great job with X-Guard. If you watch Charles Oliveira versus Kevin Lee, does a great job with Y-Guard, which is very similar to X-Guard, and uses it to enter the saddle. Anthony says, do you think Usman trails off in the same way Woodley did? Also, does Conor try to go after 170 now that there's about as favourable of a matchup as he can get? There? Do you see Triple C coming back stronger, or did the game pass him by? Starting with Usman, I hope not. That would be really sad. But that is the division of the big fall-off. I mean, how crazy is it that both Johnny Hendricks and Tyron Woodley were in talks of like, this guy has the talent to be as good as or better than GSP. You know, they were talking about Tyron Woodley in terms of title defenses. They were talking about him in contention with GSP before he fell off. And then they just became shells of themselves. Now, Johnny Hendricks, there was, I believe he was hit by both the IV ban and the coming of USADA. But Woodley, you know, he was champion under USADA. He just, he was always a weird style because he was very low output. But he just hit a wall and, never... I think the fact that he could never change it up really hurt him too. But Usman, his injuries to his knees have been a thing for a long time. I'm quite surprised that more people haven't tried to low kick him, but obviously against a wrestler, the last thing you want to do is give him your leg. But I think, you know, with the wrestling and the boxing off both stances and the gas tank, he's got the potential to be a force for quite a long time, unless his chin is shot. But then the only time that you've seen him hurt were like Gilbert Burns hit him with a big headache maker. Colby caught him like once in their second fight, I think. But you know, the head kick, that'd take anyone out. So not too worried about him. I don't think I've seen too much of a physical decline. I think, maybe there was some reluctance to pull the trigger in that second Leon fight, but Leon was moving well and kicking well. And like I said, like the first fight was a bit of an exception because it was at elevation, and Leon gassed in round 2. And granted, you know, that's not me saying like that doesn't count, because Usman came in incredible shape and continued for the full fight, well, until he got head kicked. But it was an environment where that amazing cardio could be brought to lever easily. You know, if the guy's already gassed by round 2 and you're not, whether that's because you've got amazing cardio and he's got good cardio but you're at elevation, or because you've got good cardio and he's got shit cardio, the effect's the same on the fight. You get like 2 rounds of just beating him up. I think the second fight was what you would have seen. Sorry, not the second fight. I keep calling it the second fight. I think the third fight is what you would have seen in the second fight had the second fight been fought at a normal place, a normal elevation. But now we're going back to Utah anyway. Fucking, why would you sign to fight in Utah? And they haven't been able to get a champion to sign on to fight in Utah either. Because what world champion is to go, yeah, I'll fight on a mountain and have half my cardio? I think it's a tremendous insult to a professional athlete to be like, yeah, do this and you'll gas definitely. Even though you train for 25 minutes of the hardest fighting, we want to make sure that you are exhausted by round 3. What were the other questions? Conor at 170, favourable matchup with Leon. Leon would mog that man in the clinch. Have you seen how big Leon Edwards is? His brother fights at middleweight and was about the same size as Mousasi. When he beat Lyoto Machida, Leon Edwards jumped in the cage and was like, he dwarfed his brother. He's a fucking massive welterweight. Conor McGregor wasn't even very good at lightweight. He's an all-time elite featherweight when he's on and when he does the weight cut. Lightweight, he's okay. Welterweight, you're joking. You know, it's his thing. He picks a lightweight and he gets him to fight at welterweight because he doesn't want to cut weight. And because he is Conor McGregor, he can do that. But like, as soon as you try and slot that into like title pictures and things, it's just going to go tits up. Because fighting Michael Chandler at 170, when Michael Chandler, you know, probably walks around at like 180, is not the same as fighting Leon Edwards or any of those other 170 fighters who cut an arm and a leg to get there. And do we see Triple C come back stronger, or did the game pass him by? The game 100% did not pass him by. Because, you know, we were arguing over the scoring of 1 round against Aljamain Sterling, the current best guy in the division. Does he come back stronger? I don't know. If he's got the bug to come back, because this is what it's going to come down to, his passion, because I don't think the UFC are going to pay him significantly more. They're not, you know, especially if he's on a contract, they're not going to change it. I think he might have wasted a couple of years there trying to get the respect of the UFC and get the money that he felt like he was owed. But, I think he's one of the really brilliant talents that we've had in MMA, and I think he could do amazing things. But again, this is one of those things like, if you retire if you skip a couple of years of your career even, we'll never know how good Conor McGregor could have been if he stayed and fought in MMA when he won the lightweight belt. We'll never know how good Cejudo could have been if he continued his run after winning the bantamweight title. Now, granted, he's in the gym all the time training people and coaching people, which I think helps a significant amount because Conor McGregor is not. But yeah, I mean, I think the worst outcome for any of these is like coming back occasionally and then taking off another 4 or 5 months, 6 months, whatever, and then coming back again. I think that's a really bad way to do it. And if you have the money and the fame, that's going to be the temptation to say, I'll really get ready for this fight. I think you've either got to go both feet in and do a fight, and if you lose it, take a fight 3 months later and go for it, unless you get knocked out badly. But, get yourself back in the pool and saturate yourself with this stuff, or walk away. I think the halfway house is what really gets people hurt. But it's also the easiest way to make tons of money because you go, I'm only going to do this fight here. It might be my last one ever. You draw all the money, and then 2 years later you go, I'm only coming back for this fight. Might be my last one ever, and you do it again. Sugar Ray Leonard style. Simon says, do you reckon Brendan Schaub could have made a run for the title, Bappa? Realistically, if he'd stuck around, probably. I mean, how old is he? Oh, wow, he's 40. Well, he looks good for it. But yeah, I mean, that's when heavyweights are coming into their own. And he's been out of the game for like 5 years now. Who is exciting at heavyweight? There's not an awful lot of super prospects. He could hit hard. He could stop a takedown most of the time. Sometimes he grappled decently, like when he anacondaed Matt Mitrione. The standard of heavyweight is so low that, if you've got a decent athlete and he sticks around long enough, he's got a chance. Someone the other day, with all this Ngannou revisionism, where we're like, oh, he was never that good and he was never a draw. And the UFC offered him the most money they've ever offered anyone, even though he's not a draw. And you're going, do the fucking maths in your head there, mate. Does that make any sense? But with all that Ngannou revisionism, some people were saying he's past his prime. It's like he's 36 years old. The average heavyweight top 10 guy is like 40 and always has been. Also, he looked better than he ever had in the Stipe fight and then beat Garn on one leg. Truly bizarre. Strongest / most recent case of buyer's remorse. Sorry, not necessarily a fight thing, but a great conversation starter nonetheless. Probably some kind of instructional. But then sometimes you get one and it's just all gems. Like Daryl Christian just released 2 more instructionals on Fanatics. And that dude is, just the fucking bomb. And Jason Rao. I'm always talking about Jason Rao. I think Gordon Ryan said he's like the most underrated grappler in the world right now. Because again, he's another one who just is brilliant. And in the training room, he's a monster. And he just can't put it together in competition. Dale says, more Tears of the Kingdom updates. Oh, fellas, if you're an adult and you've got commitments, don't update the software. Use the dupe glitches and just rush yourself to some nice armor. There's no sense, if you don't have the time to like go and dungeon crawl until you can earn your first piece of armor, just use the dupe glitch. It is so fun though. It's such a great game. There's only a couple, this is the thing about being an adult gamer. You're always trying to like recapture the magic of some shit you played in an arcade. You're like, oh my God, this is the most amazing game ever. And you realize that the games now are better. They're considerably better, like magnitudes better than the games you played back in the day, but it's just not magic anymore because you're not a child. But every year or two, something comes along that really excites me. Obra Dinn, The Return of the Obra Dinn was one of those wonderful games. Tears of the Kingdom. Red Dead 1, but not necessarily 2, even though, as I said, 2 was better, but I had all that nostalgia for 1 after playing it. Disco Elysium, that is a fucking masterpiece. My favourite genre of tweet. If you don't follow me on Twitter, I don't blame you, because I mainly act like a dick on it, but I spend a lot of time retweeting people finding out that there's like a socialist thought option in Disco Elysium and getting angry about it. Or no, what's really funny about it is that the answers you give open up various thought pathways. I can't remember what they call them in the game, but like then your character stews on the thought and you unlock various other dialogue options based on that, and it gets really funny. Like, so I played through the game and I ended up being like a super cop. I was just, and I also did hobo cop. But other people will play this game and end up giving answers that direct them down a communist thought path, and then they get mad about this game trying to make them a communist. Well, you're giving the communist answers because you can also be a fascist on the game, and it's a game, you can say whatever the fuck you want. But these dudes online just being like, I would have bought it, but then I found out it's communist. But those guys, oh man, that was a good thing. And then they were going, oh, we'll make another one. And immediately some fucking executive stepped in and ruined the entire thing. There's updates on that today. Big story came out. Haven't read it yet. Might be the creator's fault. But I feel like if you make something, I'm probably going to side with you more than the people who don't make it, but get money out of it. Jack Slack takes strong view on writer's strike. But anyway, I reckon that'll do it for questions today. Fights this weekend, you got Kai Kara-France versus Abazi. I like what I've seen from Albazi. Decent takedown artist. Strong top game. Good hitter. Doesn't really have the volume. Tends to wait a lot, and I think that's probably going to get him chewed up against Kara-France. But if he can beat Kara-France, that's a huge name on his record. Big scalp on the wall. Alex Caceres versus Daniel Pineda. Good to see Pineda back from like 4 years off. Won his last one against Tucker Lutz while getting beaten up, to be fair. Caceres coming off his win over Juicy J. I feel like where Pineda was getting beaten up by Cub Swanson and Tucker Lutz, it was because they're big hitters and they came back every time he threw stuff. Alex Caceres really does have a habit of just waiting most of the time. Decent fight between journeymen. Jim Miller's fighting Jared Gordon for the next shot at Paddy Pimblett. Zaleski's back against Nurmagomedov, who's probably not one of the Nurmagomedovs. John Castaneda, do I like him? I feel like I do. Andrei Arlovsky's there because he has to be, and he's going to be earning more than everyone else on this card combined. I'm telling you that now. Jinyu Frey's back. I don't know why I said that like anyone would be excited. And Maxine Grisham versus Felipe Lins opens the card in a fight that I feel has already happened 4 or 5 times. So that's shite. K1 World Grand Prix at middleweight. Don't really know any of the fighters there. The heavier divisions tend to not be the ones that are super hype in K1. But Yuki Yoza is taking a super fight there. Yuki Yoza is just marvellous. You should definitely watch that just for him. Or, you wait 5 days and they'll put the fight up on YouTube for free. And I will be dropping an article on Friday for the Patreon boys, which is going to be, I think, 4 strikers that you should be watching right now. It's a series that I used to do at Fightland. Thought I'd bring it back. Just people who are exciting me. Because that's part of the fun of watching all these other combat sports and talking about them and other promotions and so on, is that I get excited about fights again and fighters and people who are coming up and doing different things. So there's some weeby shit in there. There's a couple of J-kick guys. There's a boxer. There's, I won't spoil it for you. Join the Patreon, read the article, or listen to the article because it'll have audio. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, blah, blah, blah. To send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I've already said it, but I'm your boy, Jack Slack. And I will catch you on Monday. Cheers. Forgot to rag on them for bringing back the BMF title. Bless.